This is the briefing for Thursday, August 24th. Since Friday's briefing, I've been talking about three-step counter-trend rotations, and yesterday I talked about the fractal nature of the markets and how even with a counter-trend rotation, we have to keep in mind there's the fractal nature of them, especially when you start with the shorter-term time frames and then expand out into the longer-term time frames, which is the typical thing to do when you're not sure what's happening in terms of some type of short-term development in terms of price. I think this is a really good time to review basically what's happened since Friday. And I think it's really good, helpful in terms of what we're doing and what we're seeing in terms of going forward. Now, going back to Friday's trading, this is Friday's trading right here. This is the S&Ps or the spiders on a 15-minute basis. And you remember I talked about this at the end of the day on Friday about this being a three-step counter-trend rotation where legs 1 were almost equal to leg 3 in terms of the spiders. And I also discussed the fact that this could develop into something more complex where this is a 1, 2, 3, 1, then you get a leg 2, and then you get a third leg. So basically, in the way I look at this is this is leg 2. If this leg is not taken out, then that increases the probabilities that this is developing into something more complex where you get a 1, 2, 3, 1, a 2, and then a 3, and that's exactly what occurred. So this was Monday's trading. And Monday's projection, when I did that, projected for the S&Ps to, or the spiders I should say, to peak where there was equality between legs 1 and 3 at 441. And on the opening on Tuesday, you can see it exactly hit 441. I shouldn't say exactly, but it really hit pretty close to 441. Now, I'm not going to do this for the Qs, but the Qs were basically the same thing in terms of the NASDAQ. But the NASDAQ or the Qs fell a little bit short of the projections that were happening. Now, what happened on Tuesday was that we started to get this move to the downside, and then we got a pause. But this being leg 2 was never taken out, which kind of left us wondering exactly, well, what is going on? And this 441 area was taken out on Wednesday, which then suggested that this was not complete and that something else may be going on. And that's exactly what happened. Now, in Wednesday's trading, when we got this move above, and last night's briefing after the close, I talked about the fact that we could look for the potential for this developing into something greater in degree of time and price in terms of a counter trend rotation. And I showed last night the hourly chart of what was happening in the spiders and the Qs, and I showed the projection of where we could expect equality between legs 1 and 3 at about the 445.75, 445 area. 445.80 area, and in the Qs it came up to the 374 area. Now, when you go back and you look at what's happening in terms of the 15-minute chart, it's really not that clear as to how this is developing into 3 steps. But when you look at an hourly chart, when you step back a couple time frames and look at what's happening, it's really very clear. Here's a 1, 2, 3, 1, a 2, and then a 3 projecting right up to this 445.80 area. And I think the high yesterday came in right around 445.22, so it was pretty close. And the same thing occurred in the Qs. You can see the 1, 2, and 3 that occurred. Also, volume was falling and declining going into each of these highs. And you look at this whole thing as a counter trend rotation, you can see that it did develop into 3 steps. But important to remember the fractal nature of this, in that this broke down into 3 steps, this broke down into 3 steps, and then this broke down into 3 steps. So basically 3 different time frames, but looking at the hourly chart gave us a pretty good, clearer picture of how this was developing, suggesting then that 445 area in the spiders, 374 area in the Qs, where equality was between legs 1 and 3. And now we have taken out leg 2. So here is leg 2 at 437.42 in the spiders, and it comes in right about the 362.62 area in the Qs. We closed at the low of the day. It suggests that the indices potentially will have more downside tomorrow because they would have gone lower had the market not closed. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in tomorrow's trading. Now, we have reached a point of being almost oversold, so it would not surprise me to see more downside movement and then potential pause or some type of counter trend rotation. Important to what happens in tomorrow's trading, let me get back to my shorter term chart here, is the fact that we really want to watch out for what happens in terms of market breadth in tomorrow's trading. If we get a lower low, and I know I discuss this all the time, if we get a lower low in the indices and you see breadth stronger than it was in today's trading, that's a pretty clear indication that you're going to see some type of pause, some type of rotation, and even a move down below today's low and then a rotation back up again. That would work off some of this oversold condition that we have right now. But at this point in time, we are not extremely oversold, so it does not preclude the market from trading lower in tomorrow's trading, especially if breadth is as weak or weaker than it was today. Now, looking at the longer term charts, you can see how this 445 area was a very important area in terms of the longer term development of the spiders. And we came right up to that in today's trading and then sold off pretty dramatically. 430 now is the next level of support, very important support level. You can see volume ticked up in today's trading, and you can see this move here in terms of price. Look what happened with volume in the spiders. So it did suggest that, the internals suggested that this was basically a counter trend rotation to this move to the downside. This is going to be very interesting to see how this develops. Watch 430 carefully in the spiders. If it's broken, that's going to open up trading down to about the 418 area. In the NASDAQ, basically the same situation. You can see how we came right up and tested this 373 area, then sold off. Support comes in at 355. Below that, we're looking at somewhere down in 324, 323 area. Once again, this move off of this support level, volume falling off, and then, of course, as we saw the move down today, you can see that volume began to pick up, breadth falling off nicely in the NASDAQ as well. The Russell, and I kind of ignored the Russell short term for a while, because basically you can see that the Russell was in a rotational pattern, broke out of this rotational pattern, and then of course rotated back through the area on a short-term basis. Looking at it from a hourly basis, you can see the rotational pattern that it was in right through here. Breakout, attempted breakout, false breakout, then rotation back through the range. Now testing the lower extreme, coming in right around the 183 area. So watch the Russell tomorrow also. It needs to break through 183. If it doesn't, if it holds at 183 and the others gap down and there's a divergence in breadth, that's going to be a pretty clear indication of some type of rotation back to the upside. In terms of the NASDAQ, you can see basically where we were and testing upper resistance, backing off from it. And in the Russell, you can see it's a little more exacerbated in terms of its price development to the downside. It looks to me, just from this development of price, that the Russell will potentially take out the high of Friday, or I'm sorry, the low of Friday, and that would open up a potential test of 180. If that's broken, boy, the Russell looks like about 10 points down to 170 before it finds any level of support. It puts it back in this area of rotation, which would be very, very interesting in terms of that. In terms of volume, you can see volume picking up in the NYSE, volume picking up now in the NASDAQ. So it does appear, at least from price development and from a chart pattern perspective, that this three-step counter trend rotation is over. I just want to make one more comment about this. I tried to think back. A lot of times I can recognize these counter trend rotations, and I'm working on a book on how to analyze counter trend rotations. But I don't think I have ever seen a complex counter trend rotation like this three-step counter trend rotation, where it develops in three different time frames, where you have this time frame, you have this time frame, and then you have this time frame. I talk all the time about more complex counter trend rotations, where you see this, you see the first leg, the second leg, and then of course you see the third leg, and that's a complex counter trend rotation in itself. I can't remember looking back and seeing where you get this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is complete, this is a 1, 2, 3, this is a 1, 2, 3, that's complete. Then you see the next move to the downside that did not occur. And then you see a longer term development of 1, 2, 3. So it's just something to keep in mind in going forward. So it's always beneficial when you are unsure what's happening in the shorter term time frame to then back up and look at the longer term time frame. And a lot of times you can see more of what's developing. Last night I had these trend lines up at right around the 445.75 area, 445.75 area, and 374 where legs 1 equals leg 3. And you can see we came pretty close to hitting that area as well in today's trading. Going to be an interesting close to the week, and watch what happens, and especially watch for potential divergences in breadth on any lower low in tomorrow's trading. Have a great night. I'll pick this back up tomorrow.